Explore advanced causeways, aqueduct systems, freshwater and wastewater lines, retractable bridges, chinampas, innovative farming on water, Montezuma's guest house, water embankment, painted stories and a sacred ball game. And at the center of it all, the great Templo Mayor. When the Spaniards violently seized the lands where Creator had placed indigenous people, they knowingly misrepresented indigenous societies, hiding the success of our egalitarian way of life. Much of the history that has been passed down regarding the indigenous cultures of these lands, and Tenochtitlan was no exception, was shaped by that misunderstanding. In the 1500s and 1700s, the Spanish imposed an explicit casta hierarchy with terms that carried deep contempt. These labels and the prejudice behind them meant that, despite their heritage, such individuals were systematically dehumanized. Under Spanish coercion, mestizo scribes who recorded much of the codex were used to reshape and distort indigenous histories. Many, eager to identify with the Spanish rather than their indigenous roots, altered narratives to reflect the colonizers' worldview. This allowed later generations to claim that indigenous people wrote this, when in fact these texts had been produced under pressure by messengers who rejected their own indigenous identity in service of Spanish authority. It was easy to manipulate mestizos, people of mixed indigenous and Spanish ancestry. The Spaniards looked upon them with prejudice, treating them as less than human, and the mestizos knew that they were constantly at the mercy of Spanish authority. They could be punished, or worse, for disobedience. Many of the colonial-era Spaniards treated people of mixed ancestry, even pure-blood Spanish born on these lands, known as Creoles, as if they were inherently inferior, carrying a kind of moral and spiritual defect. They were barred from church offices, military ranks, and higher government posts, and were considered unfit to exercise authority over a pure-blood Spaniard who was born in Spain. Because of that, they ended up changing the codices, the books that recorded the Mexica's history, their knowledge of the stars, the seasons, when to plant, when to hold their ceremonies, and where they told their stories. These records were reshaped to fit a completely different worldview, one that erased or altered the knowledge that had guided indigenous life for generations. By forcing or rewriting indigenous testimony, colonial authorities produced a deeply distorted and dehumanizing record of indigenous life that is still being taught today. It is like taking the book To Kill a Mockingbird, removing half the pages and adding your own version, and then asking whether the black man in the story was guilty. You couldn't tell. The evidence is missing, and the story no longer reflects the truth. That is what many scholars are attempting to do today, reconstructing a puzzle without all the pieces. The historical record is not only distorted by the omissions and misrepresentations of mestizos, Creoles, and Spanish authority, it is also incomplete, as many codex were burned or destroyed, erasing crucial knowledge of indigenous histories. I do not claim to know every detail of the past, but from my indigenous perspective and lived experiences, this account account seeks to restore the truth. Eurocentric narratives have often labeled us as savages or enemies, yet the real violence and destruction came from those who committed genocide against our people, individuals who have never lived our lives, never understood our ways, and presume authority over our history. Welcome to the city of Tenochtitlan, a place associated with sacrifice, savagery, and chaos. A place where, according to popular depictions, only warriors are shown as if they thought of nothing but war and sacrifice all day long. But this narrative seems to contradict the images you see before you. Before Tenochtitlan was built, these people were often portrayed as ruthless wanderers, rejected by all, the unwanted, those who no one cared to claim. At least that's what the chronicles, the codices, say about the Mexica people. They were said to come from Aztlan, the land of the white heron. The term Aztec is a post-conquest label coined by European scholars in the 18th century. Centuries after the Spanish invasion. It was never the name these people used for themselves. They were and are the Mexica. In this narrative, I will refer to them by their true name, the Mexica, what we know of today as the Mexican people. The Mexica created painted books called codices on deer hide or on mottled paper filled with colors and symbols. They recorded indigenous life, stories, ceremonies, and family lineages using imagery that emphasized clan symbols and sacred connections. After the invasion, most were burned, and some surviving codices demonstrate European alterations. And yet, what stood before Hernan Cortés was a magnificent city, so grand it left him flabbergasted. A city built by the very people the world had once dismissed as so-called outcasts. You don't build a city like Tenochtitlan unless you've gathered people with skills, knowledge, and talents. That is what built this great city. What motivated the Spaniards to carry out acts of genocide and to distort historical records through fabricated accounts? The genocide and the attempt of erasure of a culture was not committed solely in pursuit of gold, land, or imperial glory. It was committed out of fear that the world might come to know of a society that flourished without monarchs, without nobility, without a ruling class exploiting the poor. A society where wealth was shared, where every person had food, shelter, clothing, and purpose, not as a privilege, but as a birthright. A society in which women governed alongside men, where leadership was exercised collectively, and hierarchical structures were neither present nor conceived. It was not a utopia. Its people were human with flaws like all others, but it was rooted in respect and egalitarian principles that directly threatened the very foundation of European aristocratic rule. That, above all, was intolerable, because for men like Hernan Cortés, who were second-class subjects in the royal courts of their own countries, this new world offered something more intoxicating than gold, the chance to crown themselves kings. The society of this continent operated on systems of reciprocity and bartering, where goods and services were exchanged based on mutual need rather than monetary profit. This decentralized and egalitarian model functioned without imposed hierarchies or wealth accumulation. Such a way of life stood in contrast to European colonial systems, which depended on control, taxation, and the ownership of land and labor. Confronted with a society that challenged their worldview, colonial powers did not simply dismantle it, they attempted to erase it. They committed genocide in an effort to hide the existence of an alternative sustainable way of life. But they did not succeed. We are still here, not because their systems allowed it, but because it was never Creator's plan for us to disappear. Indigenous societies began as small family groups where survival depended on every person contributing to the well-being of the whole. Egalitarianism wasn't an ideal, it was a lived reality, born from necessity and strengthened through generations of shared labor, mutual respect, collective care, and love. It was not perfect, but it was true. True in the way people helped one another, made decisions together, and built lives rooted in cooperation rather than control. This is the foundation from which our indigenous societies grew. Tenochtitlan was not the first of its kind. Long before its rise, great cities like Teotihuacan, the Olmec, and the Mayans flourished as metropolises with monumental architecture, complex systems of governance, and deeply rooted spiritual and egalitarian traditions. We see magnificent pyramids and sacred architecture in Mesoamerica that the world easily recognizes as great civilizations. But here, in what is now the United States, the same level of achievement is dismissed with a single word: mounds. That word minimizes what our ancestors truly built. These weren't just piles of earth. They were massive ceremonial centers and sacred complexes carefully aligned with the stars and the natural world. Places like Cahokia, Poverty Point, and the Hopewell ceremonial sites, and many others across this land, were just as grand, just as intentional, and just as spiritually powerful as the cities of Mesoamerica. The only difference is the name that outsiders gave them. These monumental indigenous centers functioned as major urban hubs, attracting people from surrounding smaller settlements in much the same way that modern metropolitan cities draw residents from nearby towns. These were indigenous city centers, temples, and monumental architectures, the living heart of a continent-wide civilization that was deeply connected long before colonial borders divided us. These were not isolated wonders. They were part of an ancient, interconnected world. Even now, with the help of LiDAR technology, archaeologists are uncovering hidden cities beneath the forests, vast planned metropolises that rivaled Tenochtitlan in scale and sophistication. Their discovery continues to prove what indigenous people have always known, that these lands were not empty nor primitive, but filled with civilizations of profound intelligence, order, and beauty. Now that we understand a little bit more about why all this happened, why genocide was committed in fear of a different truth, let us enter the tunnel of time and experience history not through the cold, biased lens of European colonialism, but through indigenous eyes, the eyes of the men, women, elders, children, and the memory of our ancestors who lived, led, and loved in balance. Tenochtitlan's Causeways and Bridges, a closer look at indigenous engineering. Tenochtitlan was linked by 3 causeways, each passing through neighboring settlements. These connections highlight the interdependence of the region and the collaborative nature of its people, whose contributions made Tenochtitlan the thriving city that it was. Tenochtitlan's causeways linked the island city to surrounding lands, connecting main centers. To the north lay the city of Tlatelolco. Renowned for its marketplace and bustling trade, it was a city that mirrored Tenochtitlan. However, Tlatelolco's pyramid was slightly smaller, though still significant. Some studies and syntheses record the length of the northern causeway to be about 1.2 to 1.9 miles, approximately 2 to 3 kilometers as a practical travel distance. To the east of Tenochtitlan lay Texcoco, a city known for its scholarship, gardens, and mastery of water. Around 1450, the Netzahualcoyotl dike was built across Lake Texcoco to protect the city and manage its waters. While colonial accounts often single out Netzahualcoyotl, this was truly a collective achievement. Councils of engineers, elders, and water keepers guided the work, shaping the dike with wooden posts, rock, sand, and earth, and creating gates to control the water. Stretching about 10 miles, it guarded against flooding, kept fresh water safe, and supported the agriculture and daily life. This was community in action, not the work of one ruler, but a shared effort in a sustainable, egalitarian life. The main causeway to the south stretched about 5 miles, 8 kilometers, to Iztapalapa, rising roughly 5 feet, 1.5 meters above the lake. Iztapalapa sat on a peninsula between freshwater lake Xochimilco and saltwater lake Texcoco, an ideal location for chinampa or floating garden agriculture. These gardens produced abundant food to sustain Tenochtitlan's population. Xochimilco dedicated an entire basin to intensive chinampa cultivation, with a network of artificial islands and canals that provided much of the city's food and flowers. From the causeways, the basin appeared as a boundless flower field, a testament to the ingenuity of the Mexica people. To the west of Tenochtitlan, Chapultepec rose as a sanctuary of life, its springs spilling forth fresh, clear water that nourished the city and all who dwelled within it. These waters were more than a resource. They were the pulse of the city, the silent force that sustained crops, homes, and people alike. Without Chapultepec, Tenochtitlan could not have thrived. Water was and remains the essence of life. Not far beyond Chapultepec, Tlacopan stood as another vital settlement within this greater network of lakeside communities, contributing its own share of sustenance, craft, and nourishment. Together, these cities wove a living web of life, where water, food, and human ingenuity flowed freely, supporting a civilization whose vitality rested not on conquest, but on the shared strength of its people and the blessing of the natural world. What truly set these causeways apart is the scale. They were not narrow footpaths. They stretched wide across the lake. Typically, the width of these causeways measured approximately 20 to 25 feet wide, which is equivalent to 5 to 6 meters, allowing for the passage of people and goods comfortably. The causeways were composed of layers of earth, stone, and lime, with wooden bridges that could be removed to allow canoes to pass, demonstrating the causeway's dual function as both a roadway and a water management system. The first step in building a causeway was creating a stable base over the lake's shallow waters. Wooden posts were driven into the lake bed to mark boundaries and stabilize edges. Between these posts, woven mats of reeds or bushwood were laid flat across the water, forming a flexible but strong base. These mats prevented the mud and stones from shifting, much like the floating gardens or chinampas that fed the city. On top of mats woven from reeds, layers of mud, silt, and small pebbles were carefully laid, forming the first solid platform. Over this, the Mexica placed large stones, dense volcanic basalt, and andesite, alongside lighter porous tanzitol. some submerged beneath the water, others rising above, creating a firm, stable core. The gaps were filled with packed earth, leveled carefully, then water was poured over it to compact and stabilize the soil. Quicklime plaster was applied last, binding the layers into a single unyielding foundation. These roads were humongous, engineered to move life itself across the lake. This was no borrowed knowledge. This was purely indigenous innovation, a testament to the vision, intelligence, and skill of the Mexica people. The world has underestimated them for too long, but now their genius can be seen, celebrated, and understood. The scale, the precision, the beauty, it is extraordinary, and it is theirs. Truly remarkable. The Mexica did not have modern Portland cement, yet they possessed a sophisticated knowledge of lime plaster technology. To make lime plaster, they heated limestone or seashells, which are made of calcium carbonate, in very hot fires. The heat changed them into quicklime, also called calcium oxide. When water was added, the quicklime slaked, forming a soft white pasty substance known as slaked lime, the essential binder for many of their construction projects. Archaeological analyses demonstrate that lime was rarely used alone. To enhance its strength and workability, the Mexica mixed it with sand, pulverized volcanic stone, or tanzatol, and sometimes clay or earth. Organic additives such as cactus sap may have also been incorporated to increase adhesion and slow drying, a technique still observed in traditional Mexican lime plasters today. This combination produced a basic concrete or mortar far more durable than simple lime paste. Visually, freshly laid lime plaster appears bright white, chalky, and smooth. With time and exposure to sunlight and use, it could mellow to off-white, beige, or light gray. Yet, it would still have contrasted strikingly with the dark waters of the lake and the surrounding earth. Spanish accounts from the conquest era remark on the brilliant, luminous appearance of Tenochtitlan's streets, reflecting both the skill and aesthetic sensibility of its builders. When I first studied how the great causeways of Tenochtitlan connected the island city to the mainland, I asked myself, how could the people have built a bridge strong enough to walk across, yet open wide enough for canoes to pass through? This design is my answer, built entirely with the materials and tools our ancestors had. A trench is dug on each side of the causeway's opening. These trenches form the foundation for the bridge and the space where the wooden supports will sit. Within each trench, strong wooden planks are laid down as a foundation. Carved wooden brackets with slit grooves to allow rope entry are attached to these planks. They hold everything firmly in place and guide the movement of the top section. On top of this foundation, two wooden surfaces are added. The left side remains stationary while the right side is movable. On each end of the top planks are carved grooves that align when the movable plank on the right side slides into place. The two sides lock together, forming a smooth and continuous walking surface. Two anchors positioned at each end of the right plank hold ropes that are used to pull the movable plank open. When the plank slides back, the channel opens and the canoes can pass through. The bridge can be opened or closed entirely by hand. To close the bridge again, poles are placed into small sockets on the movable plank, and workers push it back into position. When closed, the two planks join seamlessly. People walking across would step down only a few inches, then up again onto the next section of the causeway. This design uses no metal, no pulleys, and no modern machinery, only carved wood, rope, and human skill. It's a bridge that breathes with the rhythm of the lake, opening to let canoes pass and closing again so people can continue their journey across the waters of Tenochtitlan. As the city causeways carried people across the waters, another lifeline ran alongside them. Streams of pure water brought from distant springs, filtered and guided into every corner of the city. In the next chapter, we will follow that water, uncover the chinampas that fed the people, and step inside Montezuma's guest house to glimpse daily life at the heart of Tenochtitlan. This has been a Blue Wolf production.